Hi, and welcome to another episode of Walleye Chronicles, where I track each and every one of you down, bring you in or get you on Skype, and talk about how fishing affects your life and how you start out fishing. This week, I have a very special guest, one of my favorite H2H anglers and the favorite anglers that I've been able to watch over the years. And without further ado, Miss Marianne Huskey. How you doing, Marianne?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing today?
Wonderful, wonderful. It's nice to have you on. We've been trying to get you on for a while. I didn't know much about you until you made an appearance on Head to Head, and then I absolutely just fell in love with your fishing techniques, your style, and everything about you, how you talk in the boat, how you treat everybody in the boat. So thanks for taking time to come sit with me today.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, and of course, it's always nice to talk to folks back in the Midwest from Florida.
Right. So you're now in Florida. Where did you first start out? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the state of Michigan, and it is the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. So most people mistake that and say to me, "Oh, you grew up in the UP," which no, I eventually managed to get to the UP for a few years, but Charlevoix, Michigan would be the area.
Okay. So what was your first fishing experience that you can remember? I know I've read some things in the past. You grew up with your grandpa, grew up fishing with your grandpa quite a bit. So what was the first experience on the water?
The first experience that I remember on the water was with my grandfather. Him and my grandmother retired from the Detroit area up in Charlevoix, Michigan, and it's a resort area. My grandmother can't swim. She doesn't like the water, and my grandfather went out and bought a brand new Sea Ray and did not tell my grandmother that he even bought it. So he just wanted to be on the water. He was one of those guys who didn't necessarily care that he caught anything, and there were no techniques. We didn't have electronics. We did have electronics, but not like we do now. And he just wanted to drive around and have some lines in the water, basically, and enjoy being on the water. So I remember going out on the boat with him. Grandma didn't want to go, and I was all about it.
So was that his way to kind of keep the work shift up and keep the time away from grandma and kind of still have their free time behind the boat without telling her?
Absolutely. I think that had a lot more to do with it, yes.
What was the first time? Do you remember one of the first times? I know you've talked about your first perch, but what's the first? Do you remember a lot about that day and what you guys were doing and what it was like?
I do. As a matter of fact, we were fishing for perch outside of the Medusa cement plant was the name of it back then. The name has changed since, but there are two sunken freighters in Charlevoix outside of the cement plant. And there is a catwalk that goes from one to the other, and it's the only way you can physically walk across, and only the employees are allowed to be up there. But the perch used to school up in there in the springtime. And I do specifically remember being on the boat. It was cold out, and I don't remember which little snowsuit that I had on at the time, but I remember my hat. And I remember, so if you can think about a 30-foot Sea Ray and having a fishing pole over the side, it's not like it would be in my Lund Pro V, of course, where the pole is close to the water. You're 5-6 feet off of the water. So then you have your bobber. And so I'm sure there was, I don't remember a ton of excitement except for catching the fish. But if I had to do that now, I think it would be a little crazy because you're just not so close to the water. Right. And then, of course, the other thing I remember more than anything is cleaning the scales off the fish when we got back. My dad took a bottle top from a beer bottle, a glass beer bottle, and then they nailed it to a paint stick. And then we would go against the grain of the scales, and that's how we scaled the fish. And I do remember that. And of course, it was a mess. They were going everywhere. Right.
That is ingenious, actually. I mean, because the first models were kind of looked like that.
Right.
So did you guys have a good day catching fish then? Or did you have a limit or?
Back then I don't really remember, nor did I know, and was too young to know what the limit was. However, I remember scaling fish for a very long time. A lot of photographs were taken, and we ate fish for days.
That's awesome. So wow. So after that, was it pretty regular you went fishing with him, or was there more gaps in there, or kind of how was the fishing?
So my entire childhood was, we'll call it boating experience rather than a fishing experience.
Okay.
Living in Charlevoix, Michigan, we were either out for salmon, looking for perch, or we were anchored up in Oyster Bay, which is located on Lake Charlevoix. And as we got older, us kids were out running around in the Boston Whalers, the little, 12-footers, and we were kneeboarding and tubing, and the parents had the big flotilla going on with all the big boats. That was kind of how my childhood was. So it was an amazing place to grow up.
Awesome. So when did you start kind of fishing on your own? Is there a time you started fishing? Was it like when you got to high school? Were you still kind of doing some fishing? Or what was that like for your time that kind of kept that drive to want to keep fishing going?
There was the weird thing is the draw for me was on foot along the stream side for trout and smelt dipping back then. And that was through my high school days, but I hated all the bug bites. I know everybody's probably read about how I'm allergic to every bug that bites. And so it was funny how I pursued that, because most of you know, when you're in high school, the last thing you want to do is, unless you have friends that do it, which I didn't have anyone that did this, I was basically heading out by myself. So there was a little phase there, and that would have been from, 16 to 19. And then early 20s is when I migrated up to the Upper Peninsula and then caught my first walleye through the ice.
That's funny to me that you ended up where you did, but yet you really had no childhood, I don't want to say full-time, but fishing on a regular basis. It's kind of astonishing that still kept you coming back, even though there was nobody there really to fish with.
Correct. There really wasn't. And even the 13 to 15 years, whatever it was, that I spent in the Upper Peninsula, I spent a lot of time on the ice by myself and, met other anglers out there. I knew all the wardens or the guys with the Michigan DNR, because they kept coming back asking me for my license over and over. We all remember how that is. And, then of course on open water, I was going up to the St. Mary's River by myself, and I still am in contact with an older gentleman who had just retired and saw me launch my boat on the St. Mary's River. And this was 2000 maybe, so 23 years ago. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He goes, "I've never ever seen a woman launch a boat, much less go out and fish by herself." And we became friends.
So what were you fishing out of at that time?
When I was on the St. Mary's River, I started in a small Lund Alaskan, and then my first, we'll call it big boat, was a Lund Fisherman, and it was an 18-footer, and I was so excited. It was that deep forest green color.
Okay.
And every time family came up to visit, I took everybody fishing. I mean, it was a big deal.
So you forged this kind of by yourself, all alone up there, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%.
So, and was there any time you're like, I've had enough of this, I just want to move on? Or is it just that the bite waiting to happen, was that always just so deep in that you had to have that over and over again?
There was always a draw, some internal draw for me on the bite, and just having to get out there and learn more. People would say, "When are you coming in? What time of day?" And my answer was always the same: I don't know. For some reason, I was always drawn to the water. And then, of course, on the St. Mary's River, you can do so many different things. You can be on there for 50 years. You'll never figure it out 100%. So the only time that I really, in my entire career, said, "I think I've had enough," was in 2011, and that was in the AIM days.
Okay.
Where I literally got to a point, and I told the guys that I was traveling with, "I think I'm done. I am literally done."
Back to those first, what's the first thing you learned how to do good up there? What's the first thing that you had in your back pocket? You're like, okay, I'm going to try this today, but if I don't, I'm going to go back and fall back on doing this or this to kind of get me to have a good day of it.
Are you
What's the
referring
first
to
thing
the St. Mary's River?
Yeah, what the first technique you figured out up there that you really were confident catching fish?
I would say it would have been the use of bottom bouncers probably in the St. Mary's River, not only in the channel, but on the channel edges, and then the much lighter ones on the weed edge.
Okay.
With boards would have been one of the very first things that were what I would have considered a go-to when, like you said, I would veer off and try to learn a new technique. But if I would get frustrated, I'd go back, and I knew I could always catch fish.
What was the one that you just like tried and tried and tried, took forever to figure out how to do?
I think that up there it would have been pitch and jigs in those really, really deep, thick weeds that were up in that upper lake that was, there was a Canadian border that had half of it. And then I can't remember the name of the lake now. I'm sure those of you that know St. Mary's River are familiar with it, but that one, picking those pockets because they were so thick. And it was simply because the stuff that I was reading was pigeonholing me, or it was taking me down this rabbit hole instead of saying, I don't care what I'm reading. I don't care what this is before I was a pro, obviously. Doesn't matter what they say. I'm going to do my own thing and throw all their techniques out the window.
Oh, that's so like the research you were doing.
Yes, research. Absolutely.
So what kind of stuff were you using to kind of help you along? Because obviously there was no YouTube, really. I mean, I guess there was,
it wasn't
but not
YouTube.
Quite. Yeah.
Not then. We're talking.
So like the In Fisherman Insider, Walleye Insider, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a huge phase way back then where all these articles were written. And now that I look back, I'm not saying it was bad, but I felt like it was more of an ego thing on whoever can use the lightest jig and catch a walleye is the best angler. Do you remember? I don't know if you are old enough to remember that.
Yeah, I do. I do remember that. Yes, that's. I think that's still kind of going on now with tungsten coming in. I think that's kind of making a comeback of got to have 1/8 ounce jigs, got to do this and got to do that. I'm like, I can't do that.
1/8 ounce? Are you sure it's not 30 seconds?
Right. Well, I haven't seen any tungsten that are that light yet.
And maybe the influence that I was getting, and maybe this applied to other anglers too, that what they were getting back then, it's very possible that. And for me, I was so influenced by it that I should have thrown out the magazine or the seminar and said, you know what, it's not the only way. And that is something I didn't learn until later and started really exploring.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot, they kind of, when you're first going, it seems like you don't really understand what that article is meant to do. It's, I didn't understand as a young age that a lot of that's marketing, right? And they are catching fish that way, but doesn't necessarily mean that that's how you can, or how you will, or how you can figure them out yourself that way. So it wasn't until much later that I realized, a lot of that's marketing. And then you kind of see this stuff nowadays and you immediately go to, okay, that's this kind of seems like this is what's actually going on kind of thing.
Yeah, I over the years, and more so now than ever, if I do a seminar with anglers, I always encourage people. No, it doesn't matter how crazy the idea. And I share stories of how I put plastic upside down on a jig and caught a 10-pound, 31-inch walleye. It didn't matter that the plastic was upside down, obviously not tail first, but meaning upside down, literally. So, but it's okay to let people know that it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I think it's a little bit harder for people now, even than it was for us who only had magazines, books. Yep. And we had internet then too. But they're also facing criticism from people when they post things, and I see this a lot, so it can be very discouraging. So
it very much is. You kind of, if you're going out on your own to do your own thing, especially now with, I think with how much bass stuff is hitting walleye world, people really kind of can pigeonhole people pretty quick and trying things, and if it's a random person putting something on Facebook, they caught something this way, they can get pigeonholed. But the same guy and a pro guy can do it on NWT, and they're the greatest person in the history of the world. It's like somebody needs to try those things to see how they go. It's no different than, you in the bay in Mississippi River throwing lure after lure after lure until you figure something out.
Exactly.
So what was the first big purchase? I mean, other than your boat, what was the first lure that you bought? Do you remember the first lure?
Oh,
Lures or type of lure?
I would have to say the first thing I really got into would have been learning how to tie crawler harnesses properly.
Uh-huh.
Because on the St. Mary's River with bottom bouncing, crawler harnesses could be purchased pre-made.
Yep.
However, that's when I really started getting more into the tackle, where I was learning the snell and understanding, how long the lead needed to be and what type of line needed to be used, and whether or not the hooks were, if you don't have red hooks, you're not going to catch a fish. And just there's so many crazy things. I could probably write a book on all the different crazy things I've tried.
They should have like a funny book, unwritten rules of fishing, because there is some goofy stuff out there but it's funny, we all do it though. I mean, you said the red hooks, and when I'm tying mine up, there's a pile of red hooks and they got to go on every now and then,
Right.
So, back then, did you ever would have thought that we'd had the electronics we have now? That forward sonar and all that kind of stuff, and live scope and Panoptics was going to be a thing. Did you imagine a world where we're going to jump forward that far, that stuff would be available to us?
I would think for those of us that were involved in the industry, that where cell phones were just starting to be a thing, cannot imagine the capabilities like the people that are 20 years younger than I am on what their imagination is taking them now. So if I was to do a comparison, I think it's no different than talking to my grandmother, who's almost 100 years old, could never fathom what we have going on now. Right. So I always knew that technology was going to improve, but to this level, no, there's no way.
Right. What would your grandpa have thought about live scope?
Oh, I don't even honestly think that he would be able to comprehend it. My grandmother, who is still alive, she is 96 years old and she can't comprehend Facebook. So I don't think my grandfather, I think he would have just been like, oh, we don't need that. I know where I'm going. And he's following the compass, he's just having a good time.
Did you get a chance to take him out and take him fishing, kind of your world of fishing? And how was that?
I did. As a matter of fact, I remember the very last time I had him in my green Lund fisherman, and it was on Burt Lake in Michigan, which is located in the lower peninsula, but the northern half of the state. And again, he sat there and he was a smoker, so he was looking out on the boat, and of course he didn't want me to drive too fast because he didn't want to miss any of the scenery. And for him, he had the same mentality as he did in his Sea Ray. He was literally just taking it all in. And we did catch perch. It was in the fall. He was struggling with whether or not he should have been in the deer blind at the time, because it was in November, and November 15th is a holiday in the state of Michigan, and that's opening day. And I think we were around the 21st or so. So, so I do remember, and he was a shorter man and was quite light and more frail. And I actually lifted him in the boat because they had pulled the docks at that time. So it was a great experience.
So did he understand where you were going with fishing?
He always told me that he knew that I was either going to be somewhere on the top of fishing or win the lottery, is what he used to say.
Oh, that's funny.
So I definitely think that he felt that I had the potential to do so.
For the full version of this podcast, check out Fix TV. And remember, follow me on the talk at Smile and Fish and everywhere else at Matt Snell.